Probably heard that yesterday, DOJ lawyers, federal prosecutors, went into the courtroom of Chief Judge Beryl Howell, Federal District Court in Washington, D.C. And they asked Judge Howell to hold Donald Trump and his team in contempt for either not turning over all of the documents that Donald Trump stole from the federal government or not certifying that they had turned everything over. How is it that the Department of Justice has found itself in this investigative mess? Well, we're going to break everything down to their basics and try to answer that question. Because justice matters. Hey all, Glenn Kirshner here. So as you probably heard by now, federal prosecutors went into court yesterday behind closed doors. We don't know precisely what was said, but there's been some reporting about what went on. They went into Chief Judge Beryl Howell's courtroom and they tried to get Judge Howell to hold Donald Trump and his team in contempt for either not turning over to the government all the documents Donald Trump stole from the federal government, or for not naming a records custodian over those documents so that person could certify that they've given everything over. And the reporting is Judge Howell loudly and clearly said, no, I'm not going to do what the federal prosecutors want me to do. And today, friends, I have seen so much speculation about, well, did Judge Howell get it right? Did she get it wrong? Is she corrupt? Should she be impeached? I happen to believe she got it exactly right. And what I want to try to do today as a kind of a follow-up to yesterday's video is break everything down to sort of the bare basics and try to talk about how we got here, why the Department of Justice at the moment finds itself in this investigative quagmire, because frankly, it's a problem of DOJ's own making. There's a way out. But what I want to do, instead of using Donald Trump's theft of classified documents and national defense information as the basis for this discussion, I want to use a more relatable crime, a bank robbery. I think it's easier and more intuitive to kind of follow the links in the chain if we're talking about a bank robber stealing money and then hiding it in his house and in his storage facilities, and then we'll see how it applies to the crimes of Donald Trump. So the law doesn't really make a distinction between different kinds of stolen stuff, right? Whether you steal money or a TV or a car or documents that don't belong to you, stolen property is stolen property. And the law has a certain way of going about investigating the theft of property, and criminal investigations have sort of a tried and true method of how we, I'm a former career prosecutor, try to get back the stuff that the perpetrator stole. So let's start with a bank robbery. Guy robs a bank. He comes running out with his gun and his mask and his bags, burlap bags of cartoon money with the dollar signs on it, the way we all saw in the cartoons when we were kids. And he takes that money home and he hides it in his house, in his garage, in his storage shed. Maybe he spends some of it. Maybe he gives some to his friends and family. What happens? Well, law enforcement investigates it and they try to get enough evidence to make out probable cause for a search warrant, right? That's the first step. And you then get a judge to sign the search warrant and you search the bank robber's property, his house, his storage shed, his garage, and you recover as much of the stolen evidence, the stolen money, as you can. But if you know you didn't get it all, what do? Well, first and foremost, you arrest the bank robber. You arrest the perpetrator. And you Mirandize him. And if he waives his Miranda rights, his right against self-incrimination, you interview him. You interrogate him. Hey, Mr. Bank Robber, where's the rest of the money? Maybe he tells you, maybe he doesn't. What else do? Well, you interview the bank robber's family and friends and roommates if he has any, and criminal associates if you can identify them, and you try to figure out where the rest of the stolen money is, and then you get supplemental search warrants for those locations, and that's how you try to attempt to claw back, to recover all of the money the bank robber stole. What you don't do, friends, is give the bank robber a subpoena. Say, Mr. Bank Robber, would you mind just finding all the money you stole and bringing it in and turning it over to the grand jury pursuant to this grand jury subpoena? Oh, and Mr. Bank Robber, if you're not willing to do that, we want you to appoint a records custodian over all of your stolen money, and we want that records custodian to certify that all the money you stole has been turned back over to the bank. How absurd is what I just described? That's not the way a law enforcement investigation is conducted. Now, what did DOJ do to Donald Trump when they learned he stole documents, classified documents, national security information about the nuclear programs of foreign countries, etc.? Well, what they should have done was get a search warrant promptly, get all of the documents they could by searching Donald Trump's properties, arrest the perpetrator, Donald Trump continue to investigate, and then get supplemental search warrants and continue to try to collect up what Donald Trump has stolen. They didn't do that. Instead, they treated Donald Trump differently than they would have treated you or me or any other person if we had stolen classified documents. They treated him differently, they treated him better, and they put him slightly above the law. That was their first mistake. And once they did that, well, now they're in this uncomfortable investigative position because they learned that Donald Trump didn't give over all the documents. In fact, his lawyers at one point certified that he did, and that was a lie because they recovered more documents. And now they still believe Donald Trump is unlawfully concealing documents that he stole. So here's what DOJ did. Rather than arrest anybody for these crimes, they ran into Judge Howell's courtroom. So, Judge Howell, can you please help us? Because Donald Trump hasn't given us all the documents. So what we want you to do is force Donald Trump to name a records custodian over his stolen documents and then have that records custodian certify that everything Donald Trump stole has been returned to the government. Wait, what? These are not business records. This might be appropriate if it was a subpoena for Trump Organization business records that Donald Trump refused to produce. Then maybe you could strong-arm a records custodian. But what you don't do, friends, what you never do, is try to get a judge to force the target of an investigation, the guy that stole the stuff, to name a records custodian over the stuff he stole, and then have that person certify that, oh yeah, I think we gave back everything Trump stole. That's absurd. That's not the way law enforcement works. It's not the way criminal investigations work. And it highlights the danger of treating a perpetrator as if he were different from every other perpetrator, putting that perpetrator above the law. That is why DOJ finds itself in this investigative quagmire, in my opinion. And that's why Judge Beryl Howell said, no, I'm not going to do that. I think, frankly, we don't know exactly what Judge Howell said, but it feels like what lots of other judges have said. DOJ, do your job. Hold Donald Trump accountable for his crimes. There have been federal judges like Judge Reggie Walton and Judge Emmett Sullivan and Judge Amit Mehta and Judge Amy Berman Jackson who have said those kinds of things in their rulings and their findings, particularly in insurrection cases. And most pointedly and most directly, Judge David Carter ruled that Donald Trump committed crimes, 2 federal felonies, obstructing an official proceeding, the certification of Joe Biden's win, and Donald Trump was in a conspiracy to commit offenses against and defraud the United States. The federal judges have been saying over and over in any number of ways, DOJ, do your job. But DOJ thus far has been unwilling to do what it would have done had anybody else stolen those classified documents from the federal government. They would have arrested them and indicted them and done supplemental search warrants to figure out where the rest of the documents are. So going back to Judge Howell's decision of yesterday, I think it was the right one. So I'm hoping that less people will take away from what we learned yesterday when Judge Howell said, no, I will not hold them in contempt, and I will not force them to appoint a records custodian over the evidence, over the stuff Donald Trump stole, any more than I would force a bank robber to appoint a records custodian over the money he stole, because that's not the way law enforcement works. Let's hope law enforcement starts to work better, the way it ordinarily works when somebody steals classified documents and national security information from the United States government. Because justice matters. Friends, thank you for indulging me a second consecutive video on this topic. I feel compelled to break it down to its essence, to try to make some sense of what seems inexplicable, these hearings going on in federal court over these stolen documents, when all law enforcement really has to do is indict Donald Trump for his crimes, and then we're off to the races in the way we should be, in the way we should have been long ago. So friends, as always, please stay safe, please stay tuned, and I look forward to talking with you all again tomorrow.
thinking about the Christmas cards are coming. I'm having a little bit harder time. And thinking about Seth's journal. I just don't know how much of it to share or how not to share. But can you imagine having this many words from your child at 19? Letters from me to him, letters from Scott to him. Letters from him. He had very little amount of paper to write on. What am I going to do? The Christmas cards are coming. I'm having a little bit harder time. And thinking about Seth's journal. I just don't know how much of it to share or how not to share. But can you imagine having this many words from your child at 19? Letters from me to him, letters from Scott to him.